Michael's hand froze halfway to his pocket. The 5 crumpled bills felt wrong somehow. Around him, his brothers were shouting, grabbing their shares, already planning what to buy. But Michael just stood there, staring at the damp $1 bills in his palm. They smelled like sweat and cigarette smoke. Behind him, Joe Jackson's counting stopped. The whole storage room shifted. 8 years old, backstage in a venue with no real dressing rooms, just boxes stacked against cinder block walls, and Michael was about to break the only rule that mattered. But nobody knew it yet. He stared at the money in his hand. The first payment they'd ever received for performing. $5. Not much, even in 1966, but it was theirs. Earned. Real. His fingers closed around the bills slowly, and for a moment he didn't hear his brothers anymore. He didn't hear his father counting out the rest of the envelope by the dim backstage bulb. He didn't hear the venue manager walking away, boots scuffing on concrete. He just felt the weight of those $5, light as paper, heavy as a decision he didn't know he was about to make. Joe Jackson was still counting. He always counted twice, 3 times if the light was bad. Michael watched his father's hands move, quick and precise, sorting bills into piles, one for gas, one for food, one for the next motel. Joe's face was locked in that expression. Michael knew well, no smile, no frown, just focus. The kind of focus that didn't allow for mistakes, the kind that made you practice until your fingers bled, and your voice cracked, and you got it right anyway. Michael looked down at his own $5 again. His brothers were still loud, still celebrating. Tito was already talking about a new guitar strap. Jackie wanted a decent meal, something that wasn't gas station sandwiches. Jermaine said he'd save his, but everyone knew he wouldn't. Marlon was tugging on Joe's sleeve, asking when they'd get paid again. But Michael didn't move toward his father. He didn't hand over the bills. He didn't ask what they were buying next. He folded the money once, carefully, and slipped it into his front pocket. Joe noticed. His father's head came up slowly, eyes narrowing just a fraction. The counting stopped. Tito's voice faltered mid-sentence. Jackie glanced over. The whole room shifted. The way a room does when someone breaks a rule nobody had to say out loud. You gave the money to Joe. That was how it worked. He managed it. He decided. You were 8 years old, you didn't hold on to money. Michael. Joe's voice wasn't loud. It never had to be. Michael looked up. His heart kicked against his ribs, but his hand stayed in his pocket, fingers pressed against the folded bills. He wasn't defiant. He wasn't angry. He was just holding on, for a reason he couldn't name yet, for something that felt bigger than $5. Where you going with that? The question hung in the air. Marlon stopped talking. Jermaine's grin faded. Tito looked at the floor. The backstage bulb flickered once, casting shadows that made Joe's face harder to read. Michael swallowed. His throat was dry from singing, from the smoke that filled every club they played. He could still taste it. I want to keep it, he said. Quiet, simple, no explanation. Joe's jaw tightened. He wasn't a man who liked questions. And this wasn't even a question. It was a statement, a line. Michael knew what happened when you crossed lines. He'd seen Joe's hand move faster than thought, heard the crack of discipline delivered without hesitation. He'd learned early that mistakes had consequences, that the stage demanded perfection, that you didn't waste time or money or opportunity. But this wasn't about waste. This was about something else. Joe took a step forward, not aggressive, just closing the distance. You want to keep it, he repeated, flat, testing the words. For what? Michael's brothers were statues now. Watching, waiting. The air felt heavier, the kind of heavy that comes before a storm or a decision that splits everything into before and after. Michael's hand tightened around the bills in his pocket. He didn't look away from his father. I don't know yet, he said. And that was the truth. He didn't know. He didn't have a plan. He didn't have some grand idea about what $5 could buy or why it mattered. All he knew was that the money felt different in his hand than applause did. Applause faded. Applause was noise that disappeared the second you left the stage. But this was proof. Proof that the work meant something beyond the moment. Proof that someone valued what they did enough to pay for it. Proof that he could hold something he'd earned. Joe stared at him. Seconds stretched. The bulb flickered again. Somewhere in the venue, a door slammed. A car engine turned over in the parking lot. The world kept moving, but in that storage room, everything waited on Joe Jackson's next word. He didn't hit. He didn't yell. He didn't reach for the money. He nodded once, slow, deliberate. "All right," Joe said. "You keep it. But you remember, money you keep is money you're responsible for. You lose it, that's on you. You waste it. Don't come asking for more. You understand?" Michael nodded. "I understand." Joe turned back to his counting. The moment broke. Tito let out a breath. Jackie shook his head, half smiling. Jermaine muttered something about Michael always being weird. Marlon asked again about Candy. The room resumed its noise, its motion, its familiar rhythm. But something had changed. Michael felt it in the way his father's shoulders settled, the way Joe didn't look back at him again. He felt it in the way his brothers glanced at him differently now, like he'd done something they didn't quite understand, but couldn't ignore. He felt it in his own chest, where the tight knot of fear was loosening into something steadier, something that felt like respect, but quieter, more personal. He'd made a choice, a small one, a $5 one, and Joe Jackson had let him. That night, they drove 3 hours to the next gig. Michael sat in the back of the van, pressed between Tito and Jermaine, the $5 still in his pocket. He didn't take it out. Didn't count it again. Didn't need to. He knew it was there. He knew what it meant. It meant he could decide. Not everything. Not yet. But something. One thou. Corner of autonomy. In a life where every move was choreographed. Every note was rehearsed. Every decision was made by someone older, bigger, surer. Joe ran the group. Joe chose the songs, the venues, the schedule. Joe pushed them until they were better than good, better than great, until they were sharp enough to cut through the noise of 1,000 other groups trying to make it. But that $5? That was Michael's. The next gig was rougher. A bar in Gary that smelled like spilled beer and floor wax. The stage was a wooden platform with duct tape holding down the microphone cables. The crowd was thin, maybe 30 people, half of them barely paying attention. Joe's face was tight before they even started. This wasn't the kind of venue that built careers. This was survival. This was paying for gas in the motel and the next chance. But they performed anyway. They always did. Michael sang like the room was full. Like the people mattered. Like every note could change a life, because that was the only way he knew how to do it. Halfway through their set, a man near the bar looked up from his drink. A woman by the jukebox stopped talking. By the last song, the whole room was watching. When they finished, the applause was real. Not loud, not wild, but real. The bar owner paid them $18. Joe split it carefully. Michael got his share, $3, this time. Smaller venue, smaller crowd, smaller cut. But he folded the bills and added them to the $5 in his pocket. $8 now. He didn't spend any of it. Didn't even think about spending it. He was saving. For what, he still didn't know. But somewhere in the back of his mind, a clock had started ticking. Not loud, not urgent, but present. Something was coming. He could feel it, the way you feel a storm before the sky turns dark. 3 gigs later, in a club outside Detroit, Michael had $14. The weight in his pocket was becoming something he could feel when he moved. A small solid reminder that he was building something. His brothers noticed. Tito asked him once what he was saving for. Michael shrugged. Tito laughed, and let it go. Jermaine made a joke about Michael turning into a little banker. Jackie said nothing, but he watched Michael with a new kind of curiosity, like he was trying to figure out a puzzle he hadn't known existed. "Wait?" Joe never asked again. But Michael caught his father looking at him sometimes. When Joe thought no one was paying attention, it wasn't suspicion, it wasn't disapproval, it was something closer to assessment. Like Joe was watching to see what Michael would do with the freedom he'd been given. Like the $5 decision wasn't just about money. It was a test, and Michael was still taking it. 1 week passed, then 2. The gigs kept coming. Springfield, then Peoria, then back to Gary for a weekend show. Michael's pocket grew heavier. $20, $24, $28. Each performance brought them closer to something, though he couldn't name what. And each dollar felt like a brick in a foundation he was building without blueprints. 2 months in, Michael had $32. They were in Chicago, playing a club with better lighting and a real sound system. The crowd was larger, more responsive. Afterward, a man in a suit approached Joe and talked about contracts, about studio time, about possibilities. Joe listened with that same locked focus, asking questions, taking notes. The man handed Joe a business card and said, "Call me in 3 weeks. We'll see what you got." 3 weeks. Michael felt the weight shift in his pocket. Suddenly $32 wasn't just savings, it was a countdown. That night, in the motel room they all shared, Joe sat on the edge of the bed and stared at the card for a long time. Michael watched from the corner where he was supposed to be sleeping. His father's face was unreadable, but his hands were still. Joe Jackson's hands were never still unless he was thinking hard. Finally, Joe looked up. Not at Michael specifically, at all of them. "We're close," he said. "Real close, but close doesn't pay bills. Close doesn't get you in a studio. 3 weeks. That's what the man said. 3 weeks to get tighter, sharper, ready. We need to be better. We need to be perfect." Nobody argued. They knew. Joe stood and walked to the window. "We got 1 shot at this, maybe 2 if we're lucky. We waste it, we go back to Gary and we stay there. You understand?" They understood. Michael's hand drifted to his pocket. $32. Earned over weeks of stages, and crowds and songs that left his voice raw. $32 that represented something bigger than the number. It represented control. Choice. The ability to say "this is mine," and have it mean something. But it also represented something else now. It represented the gap between what they had and what they needed. 3 weeks from now, Joe would make a phone call. 3 weeks to prove they were ready, and whatever happened after that call would determine whether they kept grinding through smoky clubs or stepped into something bigger. Michael didn't know what would happen, but tonight he held something that could help close that gap. Michael pulled the money out, slowly. The bills were worn now, softened by handling, by being carried close. He unfolded them and smoothed them flat against his knee. His brothers were asleep, or pretending to be. Joe was still at the window, staring out at the parking lot, at the highway beyond, at the distance between here and where they wanted to go. "Dad." Joe turned. Michael held out the money. Joe's face didn't change, but something in his eyes shifted. He crossed the room and looked down at the bills in Michael's hand. $32. A child's savings. A small fortune to an 8-year-old. A drop in the bucket of what a recording contract would cost. "What's this for?" Joe asked. "For the group," Michael said. "For the next step, whatever we need." Joe didn't take the money right away. He studied Michael's face, searching for something. Regret, hesitation, the desire to take it back. He didn't find it. Michael's hand was steady. "You sure?" Joe asked. "I told you, money you keep is yours. I meant that." "I know," Michael said, "but this is better." Joe took the bills. He folded them once and put them in his wallet. Then he did something Michael had never seen him do. He put his hand on Michael's shoulder. Not rough, not corrective, just there, and nodded. "That's leadership," Joe said quietly. "That's how you build something that lasts." He let go and turned away. Back to the window, back to his planning. Michael lay down on the thin motel mattress, his pocket empty for the first time in weeks. But he didn't feel the loss. He felt something else, something that didn't have a name yet, but felt like the beginning of understanding who he was beyond the songs, beyond the stage. He was someone who could hold on, and someone who could let go. Both mattered. 3 weeks later, Joe used part of that money, combined with what he'd saved and what he'd borrowed, to pay for a demo session at a small studio in Detroit. The countdown was over. The Jackson 5 recorded 2 songs. The sound engineer said they were good. Better than good. Joe sent the tape to 4 different labels. Motown called back. Years later, when journalists asked Michael about his childhood, about the grind, and the pressure and the endless rehearsals, he never told them about the $5. It wasn't dramatic enough for a headline. It wasn't the kind of story that fit neatly into the narrative of a boy who became the king of pop. But he remembered. He remembered the weight of those bills in his hand, the choice his father gave him. The moment he learned that money was more than paper. It was power, responsibility, and trust all folded together. He remembered the night he gave it back, not because he had to, but because he wanted to. Because he understood, even at 8 years old, that some things matter more than holding on. He remembered the look in Joe's eyes when he took the money. Not pride, exactly. Not gratitude. Something simpler and more honest. Recognition. Recognition that Michael wasn't just a voice, wasn't just a performer. He was a person who could decide. And that decision, $5, damp and crumpled, smelling like smoke and sweat, changed everything. Not because of the money itself, but because of what it taught him. You can hold on to what's yours. You can protect it, save it, build it into something bigger, but you can also choose to let it go. You can choose to invest it in something beyond yourself. You can choose to trust that what you give will come back in ways you can't predict or control. Both are power. Both are freedom. And learning the difference between them, learning when to hold and when to release, that's not just a skill for managing money. That's the skill that builds a life. Michael learned it at 8, in a storage room that smelled like cigarettes, holding $5 he almost kept forever. And he carried that lesson to every stage, every studio, every moment when the choice was his to make. Hold on, let go, trust the difference. That's how you change history. One decision at a time.